Well, we're going to get started. I'd like to thank everybody for joining and looking at we have, just to remind you, if everybody can keep themselves, I assume everybody coming in has been muted, but please make sure that you stay muted so myself and others that will be participating in the discussion, of course, Marty O'Toole, can be heard. If you do have any questions for myself or Marty, feel free to use the Q&A functionality, as well as you can also use chat. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ken Kahn, and I am Dean and a professor at the Monte Ahuja College of Business here at Cleveland State University, and it's a pleasure to host you in a new series that we are launching as a College of Business. Our strategic plan that we are rolling out is focusing on being a cornerstone for Northeast Ohio business and beyond. And so it is just fitting that we are putting together a speaker series to help businesses to think about issues that are affecting everyone in Northeast Ohio and beyond. We actually, for this series, have decided to pick the theme of the other side of the pandemic, the new normal. And our plan is every semester we will have another multi-part series focusing on themes. For this three-part series, today we will be talking about creating a culture of innovation. On April 15th, we will be talking about the theme of moving from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Jeff Hamden from Allison Partners and also Russell Wilson with M&M Mars will be talking about their experiences. And then on May 11th, we actually will have the topic of resilience, leading through crisis, the Cleveland Clinic experience. And that will be our own Dr. Tracy Porter, and she will be joined with Dr. James Stoller from the Cleveland Clinic. So thank you for joining us for today's session. Today, joining me, as I've already mentioned, is Marty O'Toole. And just quickly to introduce Mr. O'Toole, he's Vice President for Hand Sanitizers at GOJO Industries. And specifically, hand sanitizers is what we know Purell and the Purell brand. It is also, we're very proud that he is a Cleveland State alumni, getting his BA in English. I'd just like to thank Marty O'Toole for joining us today to share some of his thoughts about creating a culture of innovation. Our organization for today, I'm actually going to make some introductory remarks, about 15 minutes, and then going to turn it over to Marty for him to share his experiences and thoughts on the topic. And then we'll open it up for Q&A, and that will take us up to the 1 o'clock hour. So I will begin with my presentation. And I think as we're looking at getting at the other side of innovation, one thing that I think it's whether you're on this side or the other side of the pandemic, it's important to get an understanding of what this word means. And it's important for us to get some clarity on what are you trying to really accomplish. So the theme of my presentation is to focus in on what does this word really mean, and what this word should mean. So what I'd like to do to start out with is to share some possible examples of innovation, and I'd like you to take it, whether you do it on your phone, computer, just like you to write down. We're going to share 4 examples, and I'd like you to say yes or no. Is it an innovation or not? Okay. So what I'd like to start out with is our first example. This is something, and this is no promotion of these products. It's just some products that I've randomly picked that are recently been on the internet. And so I'd like to start out with the Simplify Cervical Artificial Disc. And as you can see, it was approved by the US FDA in October of 2020, and it was first used in surgery in December last year. And just to give you some quick, this is from the Simplify website. It's a motion-preserving cervical artificial disc designed to allow for advanced imaging capability of MRI. And it's a 3-piece disc with a semi-constrained mobile core designed to replicate the natural biomechanical motion of a healthy disc. So, is this innovation or not? So we will just, I'll give you 10 seconds, and if you can just write a yes or no. And I see everybody chatting their thoughts. Let's go to the next one. How about this This is actually the Little Debbie's oatmeal cream pie cereal. It's actually a collaboration between Kellogg's and McKeith's Foods, which actually owns a Little Debbie brand. And this is based on the website. If you read about this, it's a crispy oatmeal cookie flavored cereal pieces made with cinnamon, nutmeg, and a hint of molasses, featuring a sweet, creamy coating reminiscent of those delightful pies. Is this innovation or not? We'll go to our next example. I don't know if anybody has recently flown, but United in, actually it was January of this year, launched a new virtual on-demand customer service. And specifically, they launched this at Chicago O'Hare and also at Houston. And what this service is it's an opportunity, as described by United. Customers can scan a QR code displayed on signage throughout United's hub airports. And then they're going to and they also have there's a platform through self-service kiosks. And customers will be connected to an agent, and they have the choice of doing so by phone, chat, or video based on the customer's preference. And as you can see, it allows a fast contactless access to information assistance. Is this innovation? I'll give everybody just 10 seconds to think about that. And I like looking at the chat. It looks like everybody's commenting. And the last thing that I wanted to share, how about this one? This is Garçon Wines, and actually it is a UK-based firm. We thought we'd have an example from Europe. And as you can see, this is a plastic wine bottle. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is actually they just announced they're coming to the US. Mostly have been in the Great Britain market. And as you can see, this is a flat bottle, and there's the packaging. In fact, that box is carrying a case of wine. And as you can see, it's 100% recyclable. And of course, they're orienting this towards convenience and sustainability. I will say in the UK, the popularity for this bottle was the fact that, as you can see in the picture below, you were able to submit it through the mailbox. So, innovation or not, give everybody a couple seconds to think about this. Interesting, just looking at the chat. So what I'd like you to do is think about, with these examples, and let's relate it to the issue of this word. And actually, everything I shared with you is an innovation. What I want to impart upon you, there's some themes that I can have you take away from my presentation, is two in particular themes. What I'd like you to realize is that innovation comes in degrees, and that there are different types of innovation. And one of my concerns, and one of the things that I stress with students, also when I work with companies, is the need to recognize that innovation is broader than how many companies and how many organizations think about innovation. And to realize, when I think about broader, it's not just looking at it in terms of degrees, but also realizing that there's just different ways and different types in which innovation can manifest itself. So in the case of degrees, many times we have the inclination, or many people have this notion, that innovation has to be radical. It has to change, has to be major change. And what many people who are involved in the innovation management area realize is that you can do a very, very slight incremental change that can have major impact. And then, of course, you can then go from very low degree of innovation, moving through a mid-range or medium level up to a high range, where you have something that could be considered radical, discontinuous, a breakthrough. But realizing that what companies need to think about is not necessarily trying to always shoot for the radical innovation, but to think about what are some small wins that we can have. And so this is thinking about how might we look at innovation across a continuum versus just always looking at one side of that continuum. And then also stressing that innovation, there are different types. We have something called product innovation, which is focusing on goods and services. We have something called process innovation, which is looking at how might we improve methods. We can have something called a marketing innovation, where it's looking at how we might communicate with our customers differently. Business model innovation, which is about really reformatting, rethinking about the company. Organizational innovation, which is looking at new relationships and how might we change the way work is done. And then there's also supply chain innovation, which is looking at new ways in which things can happen in the channel and how we distribute things. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but it certainly is a sample of different types of innovation, but these tend to be the predominant types of innovation. And what I've shared with you is actually just the tip of the iceberg in looking at the different types of innovations. All the examples I showed with you were product innovation. And the reason is that tends to be the predominant form of innovation on how companies and organizations are thinking about innovation. And again, many times people are thinking about product innovation and with a lens towards radical product innovation. And what I hope to do by the end of this presentation is to get you to realize it's not so much about being radical, but looking at the spectrum, as well as looking at what are some other types of opportunity that we might be thinking about in the organization. And if we just do a quick deep dive on product innovation, what I want to point out that even within the category of product innovation, there are different types of product innovation. And if you want to call these new products, there's different types of new products that are possible. And these range from cost reductions, where we're really looking at how we might be able to manage cost better, to product improvements, where what we're doing is refreshing the product, to line extensions, where we're adding additional options to an existing product line, to finding new uses, to finding new markets for existing products, to looking at opportunities where the company can go to a new category, all the way up to what many people often affiliate or connect with innovation, that is, it has to be new to the world. And what you really need to realize is that innovation in the context of product innovation is, again, there's a different types of and different ways in which we can enact product innovation. And just quickly, just to share with you a framework, some people may call this the Ansoff matrix, but you can call it the product market matrix, is looking at, if you just do a simple 2x2 matrix, you can realize that if we're looking at product technology and overlaying it with the market, and we just simply define it as current and new, we can see that there are different opportunities for the organization. And actually, really, that's what innovation is about. It's about creating opportunities for your organization to excel and succeed. And so certainly we can pursue a market penetration strategy, which would be enacted through product improvement, cost reduction projects, and a product development strategy, which would be focusing on line extensions. We'd be looking at a market development strategy that's looking at new use and new markets, or we'd be thinking about diversification, which would be either looking at a new to the company opportunity or new to the world type projects and products. The reason for bringing this up is to realize that when you begin to think about innovation and thinking about how might we drive innovation post-pandemic, the same even before the pandemic, what is your portfolio for innovation? And realizing that you really need to be spreading this across all these different cells to look at managing the risk in your organization. And realizing that if you're focusing just on radical innovation, focusing just on diversification, that's going to be much more riskier than when you're looking at opportunities for product innovation with respect to improvements and cost reductions. So it's about balancing this and really thinking about innovation, and specifically product innovation, as a portfolio for your company. Now, we've talked about, that is really, in what I've just chatted about, is strictly all related to product. And there actually are other types of innovation that you really need to be thinking about as well in your organization. So what I'd like to do with the next 5 minutes is to quickly go through what the other types of innovation offer for your organization and what are some of the opportunities that they can present. So for example, if we just look at one example, recent example for process innovation, last year, there's a company by the name of Electra, which actually launched a new capability for fashion designers to actually, it's a software package which interacts with the production facilities for companies. And what it can do is essentially take the design, the CAD design drawing, and blows it through the production planning process so that you actually can begin to think about mass customization. And so this is a software package that enables companies to do, essentially, if you want to produce one blouse, You have the design, and the software allows companies, specifically fashion and apparel manufacturers, to actually get down to this mass customization concept. If we think about marketing innovation, one company that I like to use as a great example, and there's a little bit older example, and then I'll just talk about the new example, but Hilti was one of the first companies to put QR codes on labels. And the reason why they did this is because they also sell electrical conduit and other supplies for construction sites. And they found that oftentimes people would be losing instruction manuals. And so what they did is they were one of the first companies to go strictly digital for instruction manuals by using the QR code on the actual product that when people bought it. What that enabled them to do is to actually, first of all, they could constantly update their manuals. And it also saved a lot of money because everything was electronic. They didn't have to worry about printing instruction manuals for all their parts. And what Hilti has now done, and I call this a marketing innovation because they're not selling it, but as a way of connecting with their customers. It is a way of providing an additional value through that connection. And what Hilti is doing now is they have an app where people can, if they are renting a piece of equipment, they can actually get the history on that piece of equipment. They can actually use the app to look at what the maintenance requirements are for this piece of equipment. So it's providing information, and it's actually solidifying a relationship. Certainly we have business model innovation. As I mentioned, it's about re-envisioning an industry, recreating an industry. And I don't know if anybody's familiar with the company GoShare, but GoShare is trying to be the Uber for moving, where if you want to move something, you can actually pull out your phone and you can actually schedule somebody to show up with a truck to help you move something. You also have supply chain innovation. This is one of my favorite examples. This was one of the winners. This is actually a 2013 winner for, there's a group called the Council for Supply Chain Management Professionals. It was actually a company by the name of Transplace, which is a third-party logistics provider, which developed an algorithm that allows companies to optimize the use of rail cars. And so the problem we had was we had a company, if you're familiar with Dow Tile, that does ceramic tile, and they decided to partner with Whirlpool. They also decided to partner with Werner Ladders and also with Whirlpool. And what these four companies decided to do is they were dealing with different issues. Dow Tile was dealing with weight capacity issues, whereas Werner Ladders, because they're aluminum ladders, was dealing with basically volume capacity issues. And what Transplace did is created an algorithm that optimizes the weight and the volume capacity in rail cars. And these four companies now share rail cars down to Mexico, which reduces transportation costs for these four companies. So if you think about it, it's just re-envisioning, first of all, one, that rather than us having a rail car, we're going to share rail cars, and we're going to let Transplace help coordinate this using an algorithm. So that's an example of thinking about how we might re-envision distribution. And lastly, we have something called organizational innovation. And one example I like to share is Lego invested in design centers around the world. They had 4 of them, where it was what many companies are now moving to, was essentially a space where they could bring in and allow teams to be cross-functional so that they could actually connect and come up with new ideas that would not be possible by using traditional, where we have our basically traditional department structures. And essentially I had the opportunity to go visit the Lego office, the Lego Design Center in London, and you walk in and they've got Legos. So there's a little bit about fun, but it's also about enabling connections between disciplines so that we can think about new ways in which we can run the business. So I've just, again, a very quick overview of innovation. I hope for those that looked at the products that I shared and said that one of those was not innovation, I hope you're looking at this word differently. And hopefully I'm helping to broaden what you think this word means. But I've only touched the tip of the iceberg about what innovation can represent for companies. What we've been talking about explicitly has been the outcome element of innovation. Innovation is multidimensional, and we've been talking about how do we drive outcomes. So all the examples I've just given you have been focusing on what do we want to accomplish. Innovation also needs to be a consideration for innovation is what is your process and how are you going to manifest innovation in your organizations. And we're also talking about culture today. And that requires having a mindset and a predisposition towards enabling and allowing innovation to thrive in your organizations. But I think for me, if we are talking about a culture of innovation, it is first important that we understand what we are all trying to achieve post-pandemic, and to hopefully that understanding is much more broader than one specific product and a radical product, but realizing there's a breadth of products that we can be thinking about and a breadth of options for helping to drive innovation in organizations. So in summary, I just wanted to say that the takeaways from my talk is thinking about that there are different types of innovation that can be manifested in organizations, that think about that in terms of different degrees, that innovation is an outcome, but there's also needs for process thinking and a mindset, a predisposition to allowing innovation to thrive. And lastly, as I mentioned, innovation is about opportunity. And the point that I want to mention about opportunity is this metric we often apply to innovation, that innovation always has to be successful. And the reality is that innovation is measured by failure and success, and that along the path, you're going to have failures. And that if you are constantly with a predisposition for making innovation happen in your organization, yeah, failure is going to happen. But as you continue to push innovation, as you go through the process, the propensity for success will increase. So hopefully this gets a little bit of food for thought as we're around the lunch hour. This is actually part of an article that I've written. So if anybody's interested in receiving a copy of this article, happy to send it to you. Please feel free to send an email to myself, or if you want, if you chat your email address privately to Heather, who's running our session today, I'm happy to send this to you. And with this, I will turn this over to Marty O'Toole.
All right, thank you, Ken. And I'm trusting everybody can hear me. Ken, can you hear me all right? I took off my microphone, great. I'm going to fire up my slides here, and as they are firing up, I want to thank everybody for being with me today. I want to thank Ken and the whole Cleveland State team for having me here, and I really am a big believer in the mission of Cleveland State and its role in our Northern Ohio community. As folks who know me and my family might know, you know, our dad worked for the city of Cleveland, and we put the word lower in lower middle class. And you know what? This is the mission of Cleveland State, right? Is to help families get on track for the American success story. And so I'm a big believer in the mission of the university, and you know, and all the students and families and different kinds of people that it serves. So I'm really happy to be here. I'm also happy to be representing the great GOJO company. You know, we're an Akron-based company, family-held owned by a relatively brilliant gentleman named Joe Canfor and his family. And you know, for years, GOJO pretty much flew off the radar in Northern Ohio, just because, you know, we're a family-held company. We sort of just stuck to our business. But of course, with the COVID pandemic, you know, Purell became like a crazy hot property. And now I think we have much more visibility here in Northern Ohio. So I've been with GOJO for a long time, and I'm very proud to be on the team there. And I'm happy to share with you some lessons learned and some perspectives for how we literally built the Purell category and all kinds of interesting things related to it. Because I think that those learnings and experiences are transferable. So I'm excited to be participating in this today. Okay, so now we're going to get this slide fired up here. Okay, so what we wanted to do is some perspectives on the topic of innovation. Entry point is that you know, innovation is, I think, is kind of a hard topic to talk about because it's so big and it's so well worn, and it's frankly elusive. It's hard, you know, and sometimes I think innovation conceptually is sort of like grasping at smoke. There's so much it could be, but it's kind of hard to operationalize it, you know. And sometimes when it comes to innovation, our ambitions are much bigger and more exciting than our ability to activate that. And I think it's also kind of an exhausting topic. But at the same token, of course, it's super exciting, and it's very relevant to this transforming world we're in today. And so there's just a whole lot going on when one talks about innovation. But you know, staying with the objectives for today for enterprises to have, you know, a culture of innovation, you know, that's something that is a matter of intent, right? You decide to be an innovating culture. And that's not just, obviously, that's not just companies. I mean, education systems, military systems, transportation systems, families, any kind of an organization, neighborhoods, could all choose to innovate in how they do what they do. But as Ken said, as we transition from his comments to mine, it's not the stuff of accident, it's the stuff of intent. And sometimes innovation happens with epiphanies. Somebody just realizes something and says, oh my goodness, I just thought of something. Well, that's wonderful, right? But lightning doesn't really strike all that often, and organizations can't plan on success coming from lightning strikes like finding lottery tickets. It's just not the way it works. And so cultures of innovation have to be very, very clear in their intent. And so I thought what I would do is just sort of do something kind of a variation on what Ken did a minute ago, was sort of examine different ways in which things and topics are innovated, and work through each one with some examples, some real world examples, and hopefully salted a little bit with some anecdotes from things we've done on the Purell team and lessons we've learned. And I'm going to be moving from right to left, which is a bit non-traditional. And so if you see it and you're like, well, why is this guy not moving left to right? Because that's the way we read in this part of the world. But you'll see we're going to start at the small end of the telescope, which is products. And that doesn't mean product innovation is small. It just means that it's maybe more narrow, right, than the big end of the telescope, which is like reimagining an entire enterprise. And so we're going to start from right and work our way left. But then we're going to realize that powerful innovation, the intent to innovate, really flows from left to right. It really flows from the intent for what is this enterprise, and then it flows from left to right. And so we're going to start at the small end and work our way back to the big end. And in that, we're going to just sort of open up our headset a little bit for innovation stories and what they might cause for us to think about. It's funny, as I get ready to go into this, as I was listening, I was sitting here, if you might have seen me on the screen, I was writing notes for things that Ken was talking about that caused me to think about things that either in our company or friends of mine need to consider. And so I think that there's bounty in just sort of putting things out there with some degree of randomness, because you never know when it's going to connect a dot for somebody. And so hopefully we're going to share a bit of bountiful journey through innovation topics. So let's go to the right-hand side and talk about innovation when it is improving a product or service. So it's adding value to something that exists already today. And so I say it's narrow, but it could be very powerful. So let's start on the left. Once upon a time, I'm guessing in the early 60s or the late 50s, some General Mills marketing genius came out and said, if we mix candy in with cereal, we'll probably sell more cereal. And if they were the first ones to think about that, that was probably real innovation. Now I smiled when I saw Ken's Little Debbie example. But once upon a time, somebody thought, the clever idea of mixing candy with cereal, and it's probably the bane to our collective existence, but it was really an innovation. And that person was right in saying, we're going to sell more product to more families, and kids are going to eat more of it if you just mix candy in with your cornflakes. So an innovation, right? And so these things become so much a part of our world that eventually you don't even see them anymore, because they're just kind of the way the world is. So Yeti, I think, is a more recent innovation. I'm not really familiar with the journey of the Yeti, business strategy, but I think that they started with cups and found it to be so successful they expanded, and I'm not sure what they were even innovating in. Let's take a Starbucks coffee cup and innovate it in such a way that it just totally breaks all the rules on how good and robust these things could be, and so they extended that category in degrees of robustness that obviously were successful. I mean, people pay $30 for these silly things all day long. I know I've paid $30 for them, and so they almost kind of created a category that once upon a time was like thermoses and stuff. Who knows what that is? But it clearly is an innovation there. So they didn't create the idea of you drink out of a cup, but they innovated in a way that is really important. So let's look at a service, right? Once upon a time, a dry cleaner said, how about if we just sort of drop everything on your front door, as opposed to you come to us, we'll come to you. And so they took the service of doing laundry for people, and they made it a home delivery, and now, of course, that's like, sure, whatever, that's just, Fussy Cleaners does that. But once upon a time, it was a real innovation. And some dry cleaner, said to his or her business partner, hey, I think we're going to get a truck and start dropping things off. They thought, what are you, crazy? We don't need a truck. We're a dry cleaner. and of course they innovated and now delivered and picked up dry cleaning is just part of the way the industry works. Moving to the right, you look at our touchless Purell dispenser. For several years in my GOJO journey, I was responsible for our strategy making and product investments in creating the fact that the world could use touchless dispensing, that you no longer had to go push on that plastic dispenser, you just put your hand under it and something came out. So putting skincare product into people's hands and away from home settings, it's not something that GOJO created that 30 years earlier, right? But in this one, it was improving on that product by saying, we looked at Moore's law and the changes in technology cost curves, and we said, ultimately we could really create a lot more value and frankly gain a ton of competitive advantage by leading the world and having patents around the way one dispenses skincare products touch-free. And so I say with some pride, we created that. And so it was a hugely profitable product improvement for us. And now we've served, I don't know, billions and billions and billions of hand hygiene events through touchless dispensers. So as we're innovating on products and services, it's kind of the easy end of the telescope, but it's very, very important for business implications. So improving processes, finding better ways to do things. As Ken said, that can be internal, that can be a supply chain process, or it can be external. It could be a customer facing process. And I've got some examples here that I think are pretty cool. Let's start at the small end. Those of you who are Aldi shoppers, as Aldi is breaking the rules and coming across our country like a tidal wave and taking over business. They've got this cool thing where you return your shopping cart and you get a quarter back, and you're going to get a shopping cart and you put your quarter in. And I won't explain the whole system, but those of you who are familiar with Aldi are probably familiar with the quarters on the shopping carts gig. And on one hand, it's simple, and on the other hand, it's goddamn brilliant. And so that's kind of like a cool little micro innovation that is very much now part of the identity of being an Aldi shopper, right? You get to some of the other ones that are big. Once upon a time, I believe it was genuinely a McDonald's franchisee that said, hey, if we just put a window here, people don't need to get out of their cars. And in that moment, that the whole food service industry changed. And drive-through windows, of course, we all have used drive-through windows hundreds and hundreds of times. And it's a huge innovation. Once upon a time, a bank said, hey, if we just put like a computer outside, that's really robust and it has a cash register on it, people can do their own banking. Changed all the rules and all the expectations, right? And I think all those are process enhancements, right? You go to the machine to get your money. You're still doing the banking, but you're doing it through a machine in a way it's much simpler and easier and quicker and more flexible. Okay, so on the right, I've got what I think is the grandmama of process innovation. Once upon a time, somebody said, all my great stories begin with a right now we're sending ships all the way around South America, and that is just not a best practice. So how about if we go to Panama and we just dig a really big ditch and we can pass ships right through Panama? That would absolutely totally change water freight. And so I think that is like an extraordinary monster macro-sized process innovation that took years and years and years and totally paid off. Right. So I think process innovation is very exciting and very much as important as product innovation. Okay, so let's talk about solving customer problems, new products or services. And so now we're not line extending, we're not evolving a category, we're creating a category. And so of course with technology, there's no shortage of them. GPS didn't exist 20 years ago and it's transformed the world. Of course, everything to do with Steve Jobs and Apple is so well worn, but it's transformational, right? It's the obvious one, creating new products that change the world. In the middle there, we've got a young woman wearing an Oculus Quest 2 headset. I don't know how many people listening here have Oculus headsets, but they are spectacular. On any given night, you will find Marty in the basement with my brothers who happen to live in London, Chicago, and Rhode Island, and we actually have a family member in Pittsburgh too. And on any given night, we're in the basement running around hunting zombies in virtual reality space, and we have a ball. And so the fact that now people can entertain and collaborate in virtual reality space is an extraordinary product enhancement, or a new product. It's a new product, right? And so get yourself a QR headset or a Quest headset and go zombie hunting, because it's really cool. And you can also do other things there too, but we frankly like zombie hunting. Okay, so let's go to some closer to home product innovation. GOJO, the roots of our company that I'm proud to be a part of. The very beginning of the company was a product innovation. Jerry Lippman, who was our founder in the 1940s, his wife was working in the rubber factories in Akron in World War II, producing materials for the war effort. And she and all of the male and female workers there, they would come home with rubber black, nasty industrial product on their hands, and there was no way to get the product off. And so they were literally using kerosene, gasoline, things that were very harsh on the skin, and they didn't do a very good job. And Jerry Lippman realized there was a major unmet customer need there, and he went wandering around the chemistry labs at Kent State University, and he found somebody who could help him design a product that was gentle on the skin and genuinely removed these tough soils from the skin, and in that moment, the entire category of heavy duty industrial skincare was created. I mean, Jerry was quite a guy. He invented that. He invented portion control dispensing, but that was a new product or service, right? And you look at the very existence of Purell. I'm proud to say that while GOJO didn't create the idea of suspending alcohol in gel and that having antibacterial properties, the idea that one could really take that chemistry possibility and turn it into a product. I really believe that globally we created the whole hand sanitizer category. Right. And so some of these things are very technology based, and some of these things are just, watching unmet needs in the real world and, and serving up products to meet those needs. New ways to create value, new business models. Okay, here's a cool one that just caught my eye the other day. I don't know if this is everywhere, but in Pittsburgh, there's a company where you can actually pay people a subscription to come out and keep your yard cleaned up of dog dirt. And so you could do a subscription service to get the dog dirt out of your yard. And so that is like the most micro silly example of a new business model. And I thought, oh my God, that is so brilliant, right? And so I don't know, in my retirement, maybe I'll start one here. I don't know. I don't need to clean up dog dirt for a living, but that is a new business model, right? And how cool is that? And so of course, at the macro end, right, technology enabled, we have new business models raining on us and changing the world, and probably forcing some people on this call here to really think about innovation to stay relevant. But there's new business models, just changing the whole business and societal landscape. A quick internal example on a new business model we did at Purell was we realized that in places where hand hygiene compliance is really, really important, hospitals and food service settings, that hospitals and restaurants, they didn't have a very good way of monitoring that. Do the doctors and personnel really clean their hands? And so we found that we could embed technology in our dispensers that created that data. And the product is called Purell SmartLink. And now we actually work with hospitals to install a system where and they obviously, this is a paid service where they know if Dr. Mary did or didn't wash her hands before she touched Mrs. Smith. And so it's a totally new business model that was made possible by the things we already knew how to do. And so creating new business models is totally cool. And that is virgin territory. And so I'm just a huge fan of creating new business models, whether it's in the startup mode or as a business model extension to an existing enterprise. Okay, so now let's get to the big kahuna, reimagining the whole enterprise. This is really innovation in the DNA. If you look around our society, and certainly post-COVID, all these things are accelerated. And for the last 10 years, if you're in the newspaper business or the imaging business or the library business or the restaurant business, or, heaven forbid, if you're in the traditional auto retail business. I was at a CarMax the other day with my daughter and it rocked my world. I mean, a totally different way to buy and sell cars. That there are just big parts of our society that are getting shoved into a corner and they need to really rethink who they are. And so it's with a lot of urgency that people are probably laying in bed at night thinking about, how do I re-engineer what we do for a living? It gets actually pretty existential, right? Who are we? What the heck are we doing here? And if you think you're doing what you were doing in 1970, well, it sounds obvious, but you're not going to be doing it for long. And so when people get to that existential point and they're really challenged to think about it, the answer, is, oh, we got to innovate. It's like, well, yeah, you got to innovate, but it's not where you start at the small end of the telescope. And, the answer is going to be putting candy in cereal, right? That's not what you got to do. You got to really rethink who you are. And so as we as we are clear in our intent to have a culture of innovation, to transform us for the future in which we're going to live and succeed, that's where the water gets exciting, but it gets really deep. And as I said, that's where the real innovation has to flow from. And so strategic planning has to inform your innovation decisions and ambitions and approaches. At GOJO, we have a strategic alignment model we use that works like this. And this is not something we invented. You see my little copyright there because we're protective of the things we create. But obviously you can go to the web and find, a dozen variations on strategic alignment models. But when we're talking about any innovation, we go right back to the strategic alignment model, especially the big ones. The bigger the insight, the more important it is that one has to really be thoughtful about it. And so what is our purpose? What are we doing here? What is our vision for who we want to be in the future? What are our core business values? Once upon a time when the guy decided to put, it was a guy or a lady, decided to put candy into breakfast cereal, I don't know that they really went and did a values check on that and a purpose check. Is your idea just to sell as much crap to America as you can? Or is your idea really to help grow healthy families? I don't know, right? You can tell I've got a little bias on that one, right? And what are your critical success factors? And what are the strategies you need to bring that to life? What are the processes you need to bring that to life? What does your organization need to be? What capabilities and competencies do you need to have? I promise you that as the makers of Purell, we knew a lot about bottles and pumps and things like that. We knew nothing about the technologies required for touchless dispensing. We had to go to school on touchless dispensing. It was like a multi-year journey. We had to get into chips and microprocessors and infrared systems and sharing data. And we literally took ourselves to school for 5 years to become excellent at that, right? Because we had the insight. There wasn't enough to get you there. It was a lot of hard work. So when folks are doing innovation, the more important, and strategically compelling innovation is, the more important it is that one has to start from the core or from the top of this model and work your way down and really check for alignment, so you don't overlook anything or you don't forget to do things that are critically part of the success package, right? So my counsel here among us as friends is, if you're really looking at innovating in a significant way, you have to set yourself up to succeed by checking your insights and ambitions against a strategic framework, and have the courage to go all the way back into existential. What are we doing here? Who do we think we are? And if we really picture this fully grown up, what do we need to do to get us there? And that's a lot more interesting and exciting and challenging than just putting candy in cereal. One last thought on this, please. And I realized after the fact, I would have loved to have made a slide on this, is big, important innovation investments. They don't happen over time, over a short period of time, right? We at GOJO feel strongly about the concepts of patient capital and patient innovation. And Mr. Canfor, who's our owner and chair, he says that, real innovations, they often take a lot longer to come to life than you think they will. But if they're real, they also pay off a lot bigger than you think they will. And so you've got to be present for the long haul. As I said, getting into touchless dispensing was easily a 5-year investment journey for us, and then we changed the world. And so be really clear in your strategic alignment and know these things don't happen overnight. And so gird your loins for a long investment innovation cycle. And I bet nobody guessed I would have used the words gird your loins in an innovation talk. So you never know what you're going to get in the day. Okay, so how's that, Ken? I hope I didn't go long. Hopefully that was worthwhile. How was that? Hopefully that was worth everybody's time.
I think it was great.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And I can see the chat again. If anything interesting happened in the chat, I can see it while I was presenting. All right, Ken, I will hand the ball back to you, buddy.
That's great. We've got actually a couple of questions. So I thought, why don't we just jump into the questions we've got? So I'm going to paraphrase. Eileen actually shared a question, and she's got a little bit of lead up, but the question is, can you talk a little bit about this notion of disagreement? So you brought up this issue of how do you have productive, respectful disagreement and its relevance to innovation and divergent thinking. And based on your experience, her question is, what should we be thinking about as we emphasize the focus on disagreement in the organization, and how is this notion of disagreement an important part of driving innovation in an organization?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think that getting back to like the DNA level of an organization, I think to be innovative has to require a shared predisposition to boldness and innovation, right? And that's not everybody's bias. Some people or some companies in part of their business cycle, they're more inclined to caution, and like a cash cow way of managing the world. And if companies want to be innovators, it doesn't mean that they're reckless or silly, but means we're choosing to be an innovative company. And frankly, if there's anybody internal who doesn't buy that choice, then maybe that's not the right company culture for them. So being part of an innovative organization, I think that changes what the arguments might be. It's not, are we going to innovate? Yes, no. It might be, okay, what is the right innovation? Pressure testing what you think you're doing. And I think internal pressure testing is very, very good and very healthy. I would, I smile to remember how many kitchen table style arguments we've had over the years at GOJO. And that's what friends and colleagues do, right? I mean, sometimes you take the gloves off, and that's why you need to have trust-based relationships, because you take the gloves off and you sort of really think hard about what's the right thing to do, because these are investment and risk decisions. And at some point they're just simply decisions you make, right? They're not something you can prove with a mathematical model. So I think a culture has to have a shared intent that this is who we are, how we are going to continue to thrive. Another, just if you don't mind, to peek into our world, Mr. Canfor strongly believes, and he's taught me this lesson so many times over the years, is that being in a business where you're actually just selling a product, that every day you need to think like you are on a downward moving escalator. Every single day there's somebody out there who is working to compete and commoditize with what you do. And as innovators, you've got to be running up that escalator to create value faster than that escalator is naturally moving down. So we broke the mold, we changed the world with touchless dispensing. And you know what? And now touchless dispensing is kind of like everywhere, right? And so you can know we're running up the escalator all the time because we got to keep innovating. And so I think that comes with a lot of argument and angst, but it shouldn't be argument about, are we an innovative company or not?
The only thing I would add, if you don't mind, having run an innovation center in my prior life, I don't want to discount the importance of making sure that when you are having disagreements, that there's common language. Because I've actually found that sometimes people are disagreeing and they may be actually violently agreeing, but because they're using different words to mean the same thing, it's really the same. It's about getting the same context for everybody and understanding. And I say that because the center I ran was actually combining folks in the arts with engineering, with business. And it was interesting to realize that one word in each of the disciplines means a different thing to the individual. And it's about getting everybody to understand the commonality across their worldviews. I don't know if you've experienced something like that in GOJO, but I just found that sometimes just getting everybody on the same page helps to mitigate some of the disagreements. You want disagreement, but you want constructive disagreement.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And there are norms and processes and practices for innovation, right? Once upon a time it was, oh my God, help me, it was stage gate process, right? So how do you make investments? And so to have a language for your innovation, yeah, it definitely helps it from turning into chaos. Only when somebody with real positional authority has permission to turn it into real chaos. Everybody else in the organization has to play by the rules, but you need both of those things.
We have another question. Just want to make sure we go through our question. Another question, this was, does GOJO license their patents to competitors that also make touchless dispensers?
No. Next question.
Next question. That's it. Question from Paul about how has COVID in the past 12 months impacted innovations in various companies and GOJO Purell? How has the pandemic affected you?
Actually, it's interesting. It really was a setback for us on innovation, because the demand for our product, it was like something from the Bible. It was like insane. And to the point that we were challenged for at least 6 months last year with a situation where the demand for our product was infinite. It was infinite. And so that was the model we operated with. And all hands on deck were assigned to doing everything we possibly could to support public health in the pandemic by getting every bit of Purell out the door we possibly could do. And quite frankly, if you would have checked into GOJO in 2019 or 2018, there's always a great big robust pipeline of innovations going on, 1 year out, 3 years out, 10 years out. And and very, very much of that just like slammed on the brakes on that, to the point that we were challenged last year to say, wait, we've got to keep innovating, even though we're getting crushed trying to support the world with pandemic right now. And so we're changed because the company was transformed by it, and societal adoption of our products and our brands is bigger now. And so we're significantly, permanently bigger and more capable, which will help innovation. But while COVID was going on, even though it's still winding down now, innovation actually kind of almost ground to a halt. And that was a problem for us. I mean, it's a great problem to have, but it was a problem for us.
How has going to, assume you've gone to virtual teaming, like many companies, how has that changed the way innovation has run? Because I've heard different stories about the issue of when you're face to face, there's a different experience than when you are trying to do it over Microsoft Teams or doing it over a Zoom session. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that we've been happy at how well we've been able to maintain our culture of innovation working remotely. We've been living on Microsoft Teams now fully for a year, and the company's not going to be back in the office until June at the earliest. And I think one of the great things about GOJO that makes us strong is that GOJO is a culture that if you're there and you're succeeding, you're there for a long time. And we have like deep roots of connectivity between the people in the different functions. And so when you've got people who've been working together for years and years, Ken, if you and I were next door neighbors forever, and then we get together on Zoom, whatever, we're still having the same conversation. We all know each other. And so for the parts of the organization that have been to the war and back for a decade or two, it didn't make any difference at all. For people who were new to the organization and onboarding and didn't have all those shared experiences, I think we've been careful about just appreciating that they don't have those foundations, right? And so I would say that we're doing very well with it, but I don't want to be cavalier to assume that it's okay for people who are totally new to the company.
I have a question in our Q&A about what are your GOJO innovation drivers? Is it the environment or competition?
Well, that is such a great question. Well, the company has so our innovation drivers now 2021 are innovation drivers, right? The company has a very, very significant commitment to being a global leader in sustainable business practices, and so single-use plastics and things like that, and the environmental impact of our chemistries and our manufacturing processes, the Can for Family as the engine behind this thing, is leading GOJO to become a world leader in this area. And so that of course informs lots of innovation, right? And some of that might even be invisible in the product to the end user, but it took a lot of work on the inside. And so the first is innovation. The second is that the regulatory landscape is a moving target, that the FDA and other global regulatory bodies, we're always, as a world, we're always learning more about science and chemistry and environmental impact and human health and what kind of chemicals get into our bodies. And so we watch the regulatory landscape on like a 10-year planning cycle. And so we always need to make sure we're innovating. In fact, I've spent a lot of time on this topic recently. We always need to make sure we're innovating for where the world will want to go for safe, mass-used product chemistries in the future. And then we just continue also to innovate, to continue to drive more competitive advantage, because that escalator is true, right? I mean, that things commoditize and we got to keep running up. And so it's always looking for ways to add value, solve new customer problems, keep driving new competitive advantage. And of course, the brands, we've been doing a lot of innovating to extend the Purell brand outside of just hand sanitizer. Folks who might be aware that a couple of years ago, we launched Purell Surface Sanitizer, and that was a 5-year investment journey. And Purell Surface Sanitizer is radically new technology that you can, it is as efficacious as pouring bleach on something, and it is so safe that you could spray your child's binky and put it in his or her little mouth. And so it is by far best in class germ kill and safety. And so that was a 5-year innovation journey to take the Purell brand and what it stands for out into a different product category. So there is no moss growing on us over at GOJO. How's that?
It's great. We've got two, if we have time we'll take 2 more questions. I've got 2 right here. One question is, any recommendations on idea management, as some ideas have to be curated, cultivated, developed? What seems to be right for implementation? What are your thoughts on managing ideas?
Well, we about 10 years ago really adopted a portfolio approach to managing our innovation investments or plans or possibilities, and so we started with stage gate process, and and part of stage gate process is not just moving innovations through measured steps, but it's also pulling back and able to watch the portfolio of investments and to sort and segment those for what kind of investments they are. And so I think certainly to have a registry and a sorting mechanism, for looking at the set of innovation investments one is making. There's probably a dozen tools out there to use, but ideally you want to have a lot of lines in the water, some of which are just ideas on a napkin, but you want to really register those things and not lose sight of them, and then make smart decisions in between those choices.
And because of time, we have one more. Our last question is about the issue of how does GOJO decide when to continue supporting an innovative project, and what's the decision-making process around when to pull the plug? And how does the company continue to encourage researchers whose projects may have been canceled to continue to stay invested?
Well, we have an entire front-end innovation process, and so if you go to like the R part of R&D, right, the research part, we've always got product category strategies that inform research plans, and so we have one of our best, most creative engineers. I'm sure he's a record patent holder at GOJO. He has innovated and investigated probably a dozen things that never came to life. But of course that, he's celebrated, for that. And if 1 of 10, really turns into a product cycle, well, then that's great. And so we always make sure to celebrate, the importance of research, and then making smart decisions. When does that go into development? And then when does that make its way through a go, no go launch gate? But we're very clear to say, if you get right up to the end and we decide not to do it, that is not a failure. The question is, what did you learn? What did you advance? Do you just regroup and go back? Do you just put it on the shelf and say, not now, maybe in a couple of years? And so the fact that an idea doesn't make its way out the door commercially, that's not a good or a bad thing. But if we didn't have such a funnel of things that some had to get squeezed out, that would be the problem. So we want to have such a funnel, things get squeezed out.
I'd like to thank Marty O'Toole for joining us today for this inaugural Cornerstone Speaker Series event. Hoping all of you can join us again on April 15th from 12 to 1, where we will be talking about the issues of growth mindset. Just confirm that when we are done, we're going to be downloading the video and then posting it up on YouTube. So for those who'd like to watch this again or share it with others. But I'd like to again thank Marty O'Toole for joining us. I'd like to thank Heather Slosser for helping us to manage this webinar. And I really like to also thank Colette Hart, also Megan Salkin, for their participation in getting this all started and getting our Cornerstone Speaker Series off the ground. So with that, everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in April.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.